Welcome to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. I'm your host, Maritza Barone. In this show, I will introduce you to ideas, concepts, and mindsets that will open your mind to a new world of well-being and personal life growth. Through eye-opening interviews, we elevate people in the world doing amazing things for humanity and share insights that will shift you to become the happiest, healthiest, kindest, and most compassionate version of you.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Things You Can't Unhear. It's funny, I've been interviewed on a couple of other people's podcasts lately, and they do ask me where that title came from, and I'd love to share it with you actually. I do remember several years back interviewing as a producer, actually Therese Kerr, which is Miranda Kerr's mum, and I remember her explaining her illness to wellness story in the interview that we were doing together, and I was so absolutely fascinated by what she said that when the camera stopped rolling, I turned to my crew and my team that were working with us there on the day, and I said to them, I honestly cannot unhear what she has said to me. I am absolutely going to live my life differently based on what I heard here today. She just had so many fascinating insights into life and how it has affected her journey and what prompted her to start her company. And I just simply couldn't ignore it. I couldn't unhear it. And it took me some time to launch this podcast after hearing that. But when I was trying to find a name, or when I decided, in fact, that I wanted to start a podcast, there was no other option in mind but the name Things You Can't Unhear. And so that's why I wanted to be able to share messages like that I had heard from Therese Kerr that in fact had changed the trajectory of how I had planned to live the rest of my life. So hopefully, if you've listened before to the incredible interviews and insights that have been shared here on this podcast, you will have had something inspirational and moving that has changed the way you live your life for the better. If not, welcome. If you've never been here before, you're here on a beautiful interview, and I think we will all take something out of this discussion today. I have invited Sarah Gwonyoma to the podcast, and she talks to us about surviving grief and following our dreams. So without further ado, let me introduce Sarah and welcome you to this amazing discussion on Things You Can't Unhear.
So welcome, Sarah. I'm so thrilled to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Like I was saying, it's absolutely bucketing down here in Suva. You can't see it right now because it's all off camera, thankfully.
Well, just to give everyone a bit of context, you are in Suva in Fiji and I'm in Nadi in Fiji. So it's about 3.5 hours drive away. It's bucketing here too, to be honest. And hopefully the sound isn't affected too much on this podcast, but there's definitely a lot of noise behind me going on. We're joining each other via Zoom, and it would have been amazing to actually connect in person considering we are in the same country. But Zoom is doing its thing at the moment. I mean, and I still get to see your beautiful face and connect with you on this level. So thanks again for being here. I was saying to you just before we hit play that your name had been mentioned to me quite a few times before you actually reached out and said, hey, you want to chat to me on the podcast? And I was like, absolutely. And I'm quite a spiritual person and I'm quite aware of little things that might come my way. So when I heard your name for the third or fourth time in like a week, I was like, absolutely need to speak to you. So I'm so glad you're here. And I feel like there's so much that we can talk about. I feel like you've got such a colorful life and background and a lot of things that you can share with us on this podcast and what our listeners will really resonate with, and that's taking the plunge to quit your career in international development and then following your reading passion and taking it to the next level with your infamous book club and Instagram community called What Sarah Read Next. And then also the journey, of course, that it took you to get to this place in your life. I know you've experienced some dark times that may or may not have been the catalyst to you wanting to follow your passions. But I would love to hold the space here for you today to be able to share your life with us.
Oh, yeah. There's been so much. I mean, I recently turned 40, and at my first 40th birthday party, it was sort of like, Wow. Well, there's been a lot that's happened in the last 40 years, but zero regrets, and I'm so excited to share with you and on your listeners, where I've come from and where I'm at right now. But where I'm at right now, I'm super happy. It's actually, I was thinking last night, it's a year for, I think, all of us since lockdown sort of started kicking off, borders were shutting down and lockdown. So I feel that our chat today has come at actually a really good pivotal sort of time.
Absolutely. Me too. And I've just got to say, you look incredible. You always look incredible based on what I've seen on your Instagram profiles and through your websites and everything like that. Is fashion a big thing in your life?
Well, it's so funny. I used to, my granny used to own a fashion house. So I'm originally from Uganda. I was born in Jinja. And my parents moved to London when I was about 1.5. And so before moving to Uganda, Granny actually had all these fashion houses. But growing up, I was like the ugly duckling, and I had no interest in fashion. It was actually my sister who was like obsessed in fashion, and she works for Net-a-Porter, and she's always just got a completely different outfit. So how this has all come about is actually kind of, it's been a funny journey. Books, which we're going to get into in like more details, has always been my passion, but fashion has now become this kind of side thing, which I'm totally rolling with it. I'm loving it.
It's such a good way to express yourself, isn't it? And I mean, you do that. You're wearing constantly bright colors and quite eccentric and big earrings, and you can express your personality immediately with first impressions by what you're wearing, and you do that so well. So anyone who's curious to see, jump on What Sarah Read Next Instagram page and have a look. But tell us why you're here in Fiji and how long you've been here.
Yeah, sure. So this is like my 11th year. I know, it's crazy. I arrived with a backpack backpack and some Ugg boots, January the 9th, 2009.
Ugg boots? I'm curious. It's so hot here.
It is so hot. And when I tell people this story, they're like, Sarah, what were you thinking? But, I left London, Heathrow in the winter, in the depths of winter. And I really needed those Ugg boots. And Ugg boots were really fashionable back then. They're not anymore. And also the plane journey was really, really cold. And then obviously when I get to Nandi, it was like flood. It was like way worse than what we're having right now. It was like flood waters. So I'm in London. I just come out of a relationship, and not a great one. And I'd had lunch with some girlfriends in Hampstead that day and was like, right, that's it. No more men. I'm sick of it. I'm going to be single for the rest of my days. And I lived with 2 boys, really awesome boys in Camden. And we got back to the plan was to basically have lunch, go back to mine, and basically get ready to go out that night. And so we returned back to my house, and there's just basically a room full of boys watching rugby and with kegs of beer. So it was like, what? This was not the plan. Anyway, we basically decided to infiltrate the group. And amongst that group was this beautiful Australian guy with blue eyes from Melbourne, who was really, really gobby. He just wouldn't stop talking, and I wouldn't stop talking. And anyway, cut long story short, by the end of that night, we basically were snogging. And after some chatter, basically 6 weeks later, he got offered a job in Fiji, working in international development. So I'd studied international development for my undergrad and for my master's. And at the time I was working for an organization called War Child UK, helping to organize these massive big music events to fundraise loads of money. So we had like the likes of Coldplay, Scissor Sisters, Lily Allen. It was like, I was in the depths of amazing schmoozing, awesome life. And then this beautiful Aussie guy basically swept me off my feet. 6 weeks later, he's like got offered this job. He asked me to come along with him to Fiji. And I was like, right, okay. But for me in my headspace, I was like, Fiji development. I mean, I'm thinking not Ugg boots, but I'm thinking like hammock, cocktails on a beach. I did not think there was going to be any sort of like work to be done in terms of helping humanity. But actually, once you're here, you sort of realize, there is quite a lot of work to do. Anyways, cut long story short, let's fast forward. Here I am, I arrived into Nandi Airport. It's like a scene from 40 Towers, absolute chaos, because there's all these holiday makers who've just basically booked to make their holiday, and there's just a flood, just floods. And we basically were able to get the last boat out to this island called, what's it called? I don't even think it exists anymore. But all I had were like these 2 bottles of Moet and luggage and each other. And that's how we kind of reunited. So basically, backstory, Tim was able to kind of fly out before me, and I had to basically settle up my life in London before joining him. So he had like a 3-month stop. He had a 3-month starting point. So that's how I ended up in Fiji with my Aussie.
It's interesting. So many people that I meet here who have come to Fiji, and they've all had like 6-month or 12-month plans to stay here and then head back home or go somewhere else. And so many of them say exactly what you have said. Oh, I came for this amount of time, and 11 years later, I'm still here. I don't think my mum's going to want to hear that very much from me, but she was texting me last night saying, so when are you coming back? But it is a beautiful part of the world, and it's a very different lifestyle to what perhaps you're used to, and definitely what I'm used to, but it's different and it's slower, and that's what I really like about it. And like you touched on, there are a lot of opportunities to help. So I'm sure you did that. I'd love to hear about how you've impacted the community here through your work.
Yeah, so I started off. So originally from Uganda, and the height of HIV/AIDS pandemic more so, there were a lot of relatives and friends dying back home. And so I remember as a young child, every time there was a time when every time the phone would go, mom would be like, wah! If you don't know, like traditional sort of African woman or man, when there's like a death, there's this absolute pandemonium, like wah! Kind of noise and wailing. So there was a lot of that going on for a while. And I remember thinking, wow, what is this HIV/AIDS thing? Because it just sounds awful. And just sort of fast forward when I got to university, for my undergrad dissertation, I basically went. There was a sort of article in a newspaper, and it was basically said, women living with HIV/AIDS tend to have more stigma. They tend to be more stigmatized. And I remember thinking, well, why is that? And so for my undergrad, I basically spent 2 months out in Uganda working with my aunt who had an HIV/AIDS clinic in Kampala, and basically wanted to find out why women were stigmatized and discriminated against with living with HIV/AIDS. And so that's the work I did. And it was possibly one of the most rewarding and confronting works I've ever done in my life, because I basically spent half morning, half just it's really full on. But I basically would sit there with a counselor who was there to basically, people would arrive and they wanted to know whether or not they had HIV/AIDS. So they'd be there to be tested. But before being tested, they'd have to have all these questions. And so I would be sitting there with the counselor, and he would ask his questions, and then I would have my questions for the research. And then they would be passed on to go and get their HIV/AIDS test. And sometimes I would be there with them when they got the results, which was even, if it was not what they wanted to hear, it's horrendous. So then that was my experience of HIV/AIDS. I ended up getting a first, and basically traveling around the country with an organization called Action Aid, where we basically designed this toolkit for about HIV/AIDS stigma and discrimination. So there was a lot of work to come out of it, which was fantastic. So when I arrived in Fiji, I got put in touch with an organization called FGM Plus, Fiji Network for Positive People. And so I basically helped them get some funding to basically get some communications and marketing material together, and also help them organize World AIDS Day for that year. So that's pretty much what my first year in Fiji was, but my Fiji work was. And then I got some work, then I got a full-time contract working with AusAid, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, who are now called DFAT. And so with that work, I was working on their health program, which basically involved various projects, from water sanitation to assisting getting sort of toolkits here in Suva and all of the kind of health clinics here in Fiji. There was just an assortment of work, and it was fantastic. It was a really great exposure into working for a massive organization with like limitless amounts of money, and also just completely varied kind of work expertise, a brilliant team. And it was there that while that was kind of going on, Tim and I were like, right, maybe we should think about getting married. Maybe we should start thinking about having kids, but the kids kind of come later. And so we got married in 2011. We had friends and family fly over It was a massive big deal. We got married in the church here called St. Luke's here in Suva Point. We had the Fiji Police Band, which we'd organised as a secret for our guests. It was a really funny moment, actually, where everyone's coming out for photos, etc. It was a beautiful sunny day. And then someone just hearing us drumming, and they're like, oh my God, who organises all this drumming on someone's wedding day? It's so rude. Little did they know it was a Fiji Police Band. It was brilliant. And yeah, it was a really, really fantastic day. It was just fun. What was lovely about it was that a lot of people dream and think about coming to Fiji, but never ever make it. And they're like, Fiji's this kind of like not enigma. It's just like this fantasy. It's like, I want to go to Fiji. And then suddenly we have all our friends. We have people coming in from Norway, Ethiopia. It was fantastic. And for these 2 weeks, all our loved ones and friends, it was just, it was wonderful.
Oh, amazing. Well, I do definitely want to touch on your relationship with Tim a lot deeper as we go through this conversation. But I do want to firstly talk about how you moved. So you no longer work in international development. You now have started this incredible book club that has been a huge passion of yours for a very long time. Yeah. Where was that transition point between leaving that career that you had worked so hard for and known all of your life pretty much, and following these passions that you were lingering on in the background? Because this is what this podcast is about. It's things that we can't hear. Something you in this trigger point, in this tipping point of your life, is going to be that thing for someone else and make them go on their pathway of going, you know what, I'm going to try following my passions. So I'd love to hear what it was.
Yeah. Sure. Well, you know what? Funny enough, again, it was this time last year. I've always studied development. Like I said, I've always been really passionate about helping people, like just helping. Well, I mean, I remember as a really young age, like being really affected by. We were talking about now, it was like poverty porn, but like this on our screens, and you had like free the world, feed the world. Children, on the screens, and they're dying. And I was thinking, I'm really young age, and my mum's going, Sarah, don't watch it. I've been really affected and being like, oh, this is awful. And I remember feeling at a very young age, this is where I want to work. I want to help people. And so I ended up studying it. I remember writing to the UN when I was 16. I'm like, I want to work for the UN. Well, what do I do? And then they sent me this checklist of things. It's like, we got to have like 5 languages. And I was like, well, actually, I think I could do it. Anyway, fast forward. And then this time last year, it was borders are starting to shut down. We were starting to get into lockdown here in Fiji. I think the first cases started to sprout out. And I'm here with my son, single mum. And I'm freaking out. My anxiety levels are like peaking because I just don't know what to do. Do I go home? Do I stay here? How long are we going to be locked down for? I'm also managing my son's anxiety. I'm not happy in my job. I hadn't been happy for a while. A lot of it had to do with some of it had to do with my boss at the time, but also when I sort of joined development, I'm a people person. I want to be there in the front or seeing where the money's going. I want to be there every day going, and not just, I don't want to be pushing paper. I want to be out in the field and getting my hands dirty. I want to be there. Hand holding, not just hand holding, but just be part and parcel. And I kind of was getting to the point where I wasn't doing that anymore, and it was just not enjoyable. And I felt like also I was being compromised with my time with my son. That like decisions that I wanted to make, like I wanted to hang out with him a bit more. I wanted to be there for swim carnival. I wanted to be there, and I wasn't able to be there because my boss at the time wasn't allowing me to do so. And I just was getting to the point where, as a single parent, I was thinking, Bum, I can't do this. Like if I'm to be wearing these 2 hats, vis-a-vis, something's got to give. And so for me, it was Easter time. So that's like next week. And there was this Andrea Bocello concert where he's singing his heart out. And it was so emotive. And I was burst into tears. And I just remember feeling this nudge. I mean, you're quite spiritual. You're saying my spiritual journey has been wild, and we're going to get into that. And I was lying here with my tears just streaming, and I was hugging my son, and I was thinking, I'm getting quite emotional now. And I was thinking, you know what? If the world's kind of got to this point where, like we're all sort of like shut down in our homes and we're not doing anything, this is the time now to really think, what is it that matters? what is it that I really care about? Because if we don't know what's ahead, you know, and I've been here, done that in terms of like, God, you know, this is really a really shit moment in time. And if, you know, what something's got to give. And it was that point where I was like, right, that's it. I quit. I'm done. I had no plans about what I was going to do. I just remember thinking, like, it mentally, I'm not happy doing this job. I'm not happy doing this. I'm not happy doing that. And I made a list of the things I'm not happy about, the things that make me happy. And literally overnight, I sent a message to my boss or HR saying, that's it, I quit. And actually, it was also like every time I had to look at this laptop, because we were working from home, it was just giving me this worst anxiety. And I was like, nah, I don't want to be feeling like that anymore. Scrapped that. I scrapped a relationship that I had gotten into, scrapped that. And then I just basically reverted back to things that I enjoy. And that was reading. Reading's always been for me the escapism and just this kind of world that I could kind of go into when things outside of my world are just not great. So my home environment growing up, not for all the time, but every time things weren't great, I would basically revert back into my books. And I just basically, 1 minute I'm in Narnia, next minute I'm in America, another minute I'm in Italy. And so I basically started reading again. I read tons when, you know, moments haven't been great, which we'll revert into soon. And during lockdown, I started reading again. I'd set up my What Sarah Read Next page when my husband passed. That's pretty much when I set that page up. And literally the day after I decided, that's it, no more DFAT, I started reading and posting lots again. And I've not stopped. And it's basically grown amazingly since then. And I love it. And there's so much more that's come out of it, and there's so much more to come that we can discuss.
Oh, it's such a strong community you formed as well. And I think you've even been quoted by Oprah's book club, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
That's some of your highlights and your wins.
Yeah, big wins. There's big wins. And I've got this, every day, like sometimes it's like when I first started really investing it last year, the Oprah book club approached me and they were like, what are you reading? And why do you like reading it? And I was like, Vanishing Half. And I said this quote. And then next minute, they're like, do you mind if we quote it on our page? I was thinking, wow. And, you know, like you talk about having nudges. That's when I was like, wow, well, then you're obviously onto a right thing, right?
That's right.
And then like, lo and behold, slowly and slowly, like, you know, the numbers have kind of grown. And I've got these amazing people that are like following me. And as a result, I've got, you know, I'm interviewing these incredible authors. I've got this massive big schedule now in front of me of these amazing authors that I'm going to interview, and I have interviewed, and lots of other plans afoot. And I'm thinking, wow, you know, and I think, wow, follow, this is all my passion. I love books. And if this is what it takes to basically stop, follow your passion, be happy. I mean, I'm so happy with what I'm doing now. And people ask, and I think it's a little bit rude. And like, oh, are you getting paid? I was like, it doesn't matter. I'm happy. And, you know, even if I'm not getting paid, I'm getting paid. But if I'm not getting paid, I would still do it. I'd do it until forever and ever and ever.
That's the thing, though, when you change careers and completely pivot to something else, there is going to be the time in between where you are bridging the gap between financially being secure, and there's got to be ways in which we can, you know, do that and do that successfully. And it is a painful time financially, but when you're following your work so passionately and authentically, and you're so true to yourself and have so much meaning behind it, that bit will come. That bit will definitely come. So I always say to people who are too scared to take that plunge, just find a way to bridge the gap, or start it when you're working. Start it small when you're working, if that's what you need to do. And it will grow into something that will flourish and also support you financially. So I'm so glad that's happening for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what's funny? The other night I was talking to someone and they were just like, oh, they're in between contracts and they're still, I'm like, oh, well, but great, you've just found this new contract. Are you not happy? It's like, well, you know what, Sarah, I want to do what you're doing. You know, I would love, and I was like, what's that? Because, well, I'd love to write. I'd love to do more photography. And I'm like, well, why are you not doing it? He's like, well, I can't financially. I was like, yeah, I get that because you've got a family. But why don't you start doing it on the side? You know, you've got insomnia. So if you're waking up in the middle of the night, start writing, start journaling. Or, when you're going out on your holidays with family, or, if there's things, just take your camera with you. Now we've got cameras that like basically take photos that are just like something out of the National Geographic. Just start doing it on the side, and you just never know. And also, if it's your passion, it will grow into be your passion. And I always think about those articles where they say, the five things that people regret on their deathbed. And I always come back to those kind of like, I wish I'd spent time with my family. I wish I hadn't been in this job that I hated. And really, those kind of messages for me come every day. I say to myself, gosh, no,
You're right. And it's inspiring to hear you say that. And, you've had your own firsthand experience of realizing just how short life is with the passing of your husband, Tim.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about, the turn of events and how you've absolutely shone through such dark moments and through the grief that you've experienced in your life? And you seem like such a joyous person deep at the soul of who you are. And I'm sure that would have hit you and continues to hit you all the time. But can you talk us through how you've perhaps navigated your way through these dark times and how it all rolled out?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, we had this joyous wedding. And then 2 years later, we had our son Isaiah here in Fiji, which was fantastic. And my mum flew over, and it was such a joyous occasion. And he continues to bring me joy in my life. He's 7.5.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, he's cute as. He's actually looking so much more like his father, and they've got mannerisms as well, good and bad. But anyway, that's another story. Yeah, so we had Isaiah in 2013, and then we moved to Samoa for Tim's job. He's navigating his new role in the UN. I didn't buzz with Samoa for many reasons. I was a first-time mom, stay-home mom, and I don't know about you, but I love the baby stage when they're like brand new, and then there's that in-between stage where they're not really doing much and they're not talking, and there wasn't a big expat community. So I really struggled with kind of being home alone, my son, not doing much. I got really bored. I know lots of parents, and someone said, don't get bored. I got bored, and I can happily say I was bored. Anyway, so, and then the opportunity came for us to come back to Fiji. And I was like, you know what? I'd love us to come back. I think it would be good for me, my mental health. And also we'd just lost twins. And I kind of wanted to go back to an environment where I knew people and there was a community. I wasn't ready to go back to London. I just wanted to kind of, and also Tim would not have been able to do his UN job in London. So I was like, if we can go back to Fiji where I know people still, and I can kind of start getting work because I still got contacts, that would be great. And so we did. We came back in 2016, and that was brilliant. We came back the week that they won gold in the Olympics, rugby. Fantastic. And you know what? I had a nudge that we would be doing that as well. So that was also awesome. And then the following year, Easter, let's fast forward, and I got a call. And there's always, when I'm from England, and with the time difference, if there's ever a call at about 3 a.m. our time, Fiji, there's always kind of like, well, something bad has happened. And Tim was in Vanuatu at the time, and I was home alone. And it was my mum, and she called to say that my younger brother had passed away. My younger brother had bipolar for a while, and so while it wasn't completely shocking, it's still like it was. I just remember the room spinning, and it just being a really, 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 really horrible moment, and then having to navigate getting on a plane and flying however long to England. It's 22 hours, and just dealing with all that. And then you're home for like a month or so with funerals, and it was very, very, very confronting. And then I came back, and I was still in a massive shock. And we were also Tim and I were going through IVF at the time. And I just remember thinking, well, the only way to sort of turn this around is to kind of keep moving with our IVF. And so we basically planned for me to go to Melbourne around Christmas time, or just before Christmas. And our families were coming over to Fiji for Christmas. We decided, but Mum also should fly over because she'd had such an awful time losing her son, we were like, okay, mummy, you fly over. So mom's flown over 2 weeks before Christmas. And I'm leaving mom, Tim and Isaiah in Fiji for me to go over to do some work. I had a 1-week contract in Melbourne, and also to basically transfer our last embryo. And so I'm in Melbourne for 2 days, and I've just gone in to do some yoga, this kind of like pre-implantation yoga stuff. And I come out and there's all these missed calls on my phone saying, call home, call home. And at a point I was not at all like, I didn't suspect anything. But then when I start making these calls, it turns out that Tim has had a heart attack. And it took a while for anyone back here in Fiji to actually tell me that he'd had a heart attack and died. So by the time I'd sort of got to that point of that news, it was like completely unbelievable, because A, I just lost my brother 8 months ago. B, it's Christmas and everyone's flying over. And C, it's Tim. Tim is 38 and as fit as a fiddle. And what the actual fuck, excuse my French, but like what the actual is actually happening. So yeah, that was our Christmas 2017. So suddenly we're not organizing a Christmas, we are organizing a funeral. And I'm also staying at his parents' house at the time. So I'm having to tell them the news that their son has died. And I'm also on the way to the sibling dinner. So then I'm also having to call his siblings to tell them that their brother is dead. And then I'm also having to fly back to Fiji with his sister, because I couldn't fly back myself, because it was you just can't. How can you even possibly fathom this? And tell our son, that his father is dead. Yeah, it was a really, really, I mean, I feel like that. I mean, weirdly, I can remember everything. Like some people just go into shock mode and just can't remember anything. I remember everything. I remember so much. And yeah, it was a shock. I was in shock for a lot of months, big time, because you're just going through motions, and I'm just basically having to just survive for the sake of my son. Survive in the sense that get up, feed, but there's a beautiful community who are there to basically support you. But at the same time, your son needs you, because he's like, where's daddy? I was very upfront from the very beginning. I'd sort of spoken to a few child psychologists at the time, Julia Samuel, who's fantastic, who written some grief works. And she was just like, you've just got to be very upfront. You know, your father is dead. He's had a heart attack. He's not coming back. He's not a butterfly. He's not a star. And it sounds really brutal, but you know what? It's what they actually need to hear, because there should be no pretense that their father is coming back. So we went for the funeral. We flew over. We're flying back to Fiji, and then you're having to navigate flights, moving to a new house, finances, just my job, taking some time off work, deciding whether or not we stay in Fiji or go back to London. So we did go back to London for a bit, but I just, after a week, it was kind of like, oh no, but actually I really prefer going back. And Susie, I mean, this is his home. This is all he's ever known. And I really needed the support. And I felt like in London, like it's great for a week, I think, but everyone else has to go back to their busy kind of lives. And it was around that time that I started reading in earnest. I just, again, like I said, reading has always been that place where I go to where I'm like, the outside world is just too much. So we're just going to go back to Narnia or Italy, wherever I am. And we're just going to just stay there. And I started blogging about these books that I was reading. And you know what was really weird? It was basically the dark. I remember it was Roxane Gay's Difficult Women, which was a really dark short story, true stories about women who've basically just going through some horrendous stuff. And I remember thinking, do you know what? The darker, the better, because it was kind of nice to read about people who were going through really bad stuff, because it was like, made me feel not alone. But yeah, it was just, I mean, grief never goes away, right? And at the time, I remember thinking, I actually don't know how we're ever going to navigate this. I kind of felt like I had to put the grief for my brother on pause. And so now I feel that I'm sort of grieving. I'm now starting to grieve my brother, because I had to put that on pause and really go head in with grief with Tim. But I'm also, it's not just my grief. I'm also kind of managing Zizzy's grief, because you know, they grieve a lot differently, children. one minute they're kind of like, okay, inverted commas, and next minute they are just freaking out and they're just crying uncontrollably, and they at the time Zizzy didn't have the words to really express, you know, that he is missing his father. So it would just come out in this really like, you know, kind of shrieking, or in the dreams and nightmares. And like, you know, I'm quite a spiritual person, and again, my spiritual journey has grown like so much. I mean, I was brought up Catholic, and you know, at one point I thought I was gonna be a nun, but since losing my brother and Tim, I am just like, I've kind of flipped, and I'm like, kind of, I've learned to, what's beautiful is I've learned to kind of communicate with my brother and Tim. Like there'd be things like feathers, or there's like his song, and I laugh about it now and I'm smiling because it's become this beautiful thing that I've done. I did go and see a psychic both times to basically reach out, because especially my brother, I'm like, are you okay? Where are you? And with Tim, it was also like, are you serious? Like, why now? And I don't understand. And so I did reach out. And whether or not anyone likes it, or like whether they believe it or not, I am 100% believer in that, in the woo-woo stuff, because it is. I mean, I don't, you know, whether it's a heaven, what you call it, or whatever, there's definitely another space that people go to. And what's nice is that I've kind of learned to kind of communicate with them both, and also with Tim. And it's wonderful. And I know that they're both in like really special places, and they've become our sort of guardian angels. And that gives me so much peace, because I used to be really scared of dying, and now we're going a completely different tangent, but this is how I roll. I used to be so scared of dying, and I'm not, because I know that if they're wherever they are, it's beautiful, and I know that, you know, we're gonna be there at some point too. And also there's little things that, like the other day, I think, what was I really angry about? I was angry about something, and I said something to Tim, and then he fixed it. And so it's like little things like that. You're like, oh, do you believe in magic? I do.
Oh, absolutely. Listening to you, my heart is actually beating 100 miles an hour. And I said to you before we came on, I'm a very emotional person, and I can feel your energy and you know, the pain and the feels that you are going through. Very open like that. So I really thank you for sharing that with us. And I feel as though, and I'm sure you would agree, by sharing your story and your experiences, you can help so many people who have gone through the same thing.
Why me? Why me? Why me? Why has the universe literally, I'm taking so much for the team right now. Like, that's how I say it. I'm like, whoa, no more. I've taken so much for the team. And now I get it. I've come to a place of realization that, I mean, we've all got a purpose in life. And, you know, it's that brilliant kids movie, isn't there? Soul, where it's like, you know, what is your purpose? What is your spark? And the two are completely different. And I get that. And I feel like I've found my purpose, and I've also found my spark. And I feel that because I've gone through this like really earth-shattering life, kind of like, wow, what the actual, that I'm now able to share my experience with people and show them that, you know what, like, things can be really bad. Things can be absolutely tough. There can be days where you're like, I don't want to get out of bed. I don't know actually how I'm going to like live for the next hour, let alone the next day. But I'm living proof that you can, because like, you can. And you either decide to sort of use the experience and like wallow, not just wallow, but just be depressed and sad for the rest of your life. The grief never leaves you, by the way. Absolutely. And it's possibly the most intense emotion I've ever felt. But I remember at the time being connected with my friends, being connecting me with various women who'd lost their husbands in similar circumstances, and they've got kids. And there was a few women that were like, it's 6 years on, and I barely can leave bed. You know, the kids have basically abandoned me. I'm the shell of the person I am. I was like, oh God, well, that's really kind of not where I want to be. And then there was another mum, and it was Christmas Eve, and she was shucking oysters, drinking Moet, and she's just got a job in Indonesia, and packing up the house. And her and the 3 kids were off to Indonesia for 3 years after losing her childhood sweetheart husband. And I was thinking, that's the team I want to be in. I feel like you sink or you swim. I feel that there is life after horrible, horrible stuff. And yes, it does take a lot of energy and maybe the type of person. I think we've all got it in us. You decide whether you want to survive the really bad stuff or you don't, you know. And I feel like what I've gone through is going to help so many people. I mean, I'd love to write a book at some point, and there will be a book. I feel like sharing my experiences by doing, you know, talking to you and doing various kind of other interviews that I've done. I really hope by hearing my story, it is an example to people that, you know, there is life after really bad stuff. And also when we're all kind of collectively going through this massive grief like COVID, people still in lockdowns. I mean, I can't even imagine. I've always said the hangover from this is just going to be insane in terms of the mental health. But I feel that when you kind of, I'd love to kind of be able to give people tools to sort of cope. And I just say, don't think about day to day today. Think about the next 5 minutes. And once you've done the next 5 minutes, think about the next 10 minutes. Once you've done that, think about the next day. And then find little tools that kind of might help. I mean, I remember writing down things that I was like grateful for. And it could just be, I remember when James passed, it was like the sun shone today, or going for a walk with my friend, or actually having a laugh. Because actually, believe it or not, I mean, I've got a dark sense of humor. And so there were things that were happening when James died and when Tim died that I found absolutely hilarious. For example, we went to go and buy James's suit, my brother's suit, with my mum, bless her. And she was like, we're in the middle of the suit shop. And she's like, well, Sarah, you know, what colour socks do you think he's going to need? And all I had to do was look at mum going, are you actually serious, mum? I don't think socks matter at this time. I think socks are really the last thing we need to be stressing about. And we both looked at each other and burst into tears. And this poor guy in the shop was like, oh my God, these weirdos. I mean, they're talking about picking out a suit for a dead person. And here they are having a laugh. Because I think you need moments like that. You need moments to laugh. And even when Tim passed, our little Isaiah, I mean, bless him, at the funeral, he was standing next to the coffin and the priest was doing this whole eulogy thing. And Jizzy just really loud goes, Mummy, why is it stinky next to Daddy's coffin? And all my side of the family just burst into tears. I mean, burst into laughter, because we're like, oh my God. And my sister's like, let's get him away. And we're like, but that's his way of grieving. But also it's really, really funny. There needs to be some kind of comedy.
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. And I love how you talk about being present and, you know, being present in those moments and knowing that for those 5 minutes, you're going to be okay. And for the next 5 minutes, you're going to be okay. And breaking it up like that, I think that's really, really powerful. And not only for someone who's enduring the experience of grief, but also for every single person in life.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful
absolutely
message.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I really 100% agree. Like, find things that bring you joy. I mean, it could be anything from reading a book, watching Friends, the sitcom again, a cup of tea, picking up the phone and like connection, you know, like I sometimes find if I've not spoken to some of my friends for a few days, I'm like, and all it takes is like a 5-minute voicemail or something. And it just can really pick you up, you know? And also cry for help if you're struggling. I just can't reiterate how important it is. Just, I have friends that say, oh, but I don't want to bother you. No, it's not bothering. Like, a cry for help can really save a life and can really make someone's day. I really strongly believe that.
Oh, you're amazing, Sarah. I have to go back because I'm very woo-woo, like some people like to call it, even though I'm not a huge fan of that word. But
I don't like it.
Yeah. But it's, you know, it's just a term that people feel comfortable with, I think. I'd love to hear a bit about your psychic readings and maybe some signs that you've seen where you know you have connected with Tim and also your brother.
Yeah, so not long after James passed, I went to see a psychic, and because I was like, even though like James had bipolar, and he died of natural causes in the end, but I just wanted to know that he was okay. And I remember Keith saying, well, you know, because he's only just passed, so he's not quite. He might not come through. I was like, it's fine. I just want to know he's okay. And he came through quite sheepish, which was very typical of my brother because he's younger, and I could sort of picture him at the time. He came in quite sheepish, but he was really really happy where he was, and he actually had like no intentions of ever coming back here. Because where he was just such an easy life, and that was totally James. And he was just basically wanting to know that we're going to be okay, but more so mum, because he was the last born, and it would have really, well, his death was obviously just, and it's just, yeah, not good for mum and stuff. But I wanted to just know that he was okay. And with Tim, I did the same, but more so actually, Tim, on his first heaven birthday, so he passed in December, and it was the morning of February the 23rd. And one of my friends who's really quite spiritual, she's a visionist as well, she said, she connected with me. She said, so I don't want to freak you out, but I think Tim's here. He just wants to basically send through a message to say that he's okay, and that he loves you and he loves Izzy. And he has so much remorse for kind of leaving when he did, but he was just, what was it? It just all, life became a bit too much for him. And I was just like, well, I don't understand. What do you mean a bit too much? And she basically was like, it was a case of he'd had, I mean, I don't want to go into too much details because there's lots, it's kind of a bit private, but there was just a lot that he basically carried for a long time, and it just got too much type thing. It's kind of related to sort of intergenerational trauma and the things that we kind of carry through from past lives to this life. So, yeah, we're born naked, per se, but the things that we all carry, and that's actually a lot of what my book's going to be about, there's things that we carry through that if we don't sort of recognize it and deal with it in this life as our lessons, and kind of recognize it, it can kind of really kind of have a massive effect on us mentally and physically. So how like cancer, I feel cancer, for example, is a manifestation of so much. It's more than just a disease. It's a manifestation of things that we've kind of carried. There might be guilt, there might be anger, there might be just so much we just don't know. And so, but it was a beautiful conversation. It was like for like hours, and I've still got the kind of the conversations like saved somewhere because it was all in kind of messenger. And he sort of described where he was, and he started doing little things like, how can I describe it? So, you've got like a rainbow. So he's like, look out the window, and the clouds basically started changing color, and it wasn't a rainbow. They went from like fluorescent blue to, it was insane. It was just this like beautiful kind of flower show, this color show. And then he was like, his favorite song was Modest Past. The day of his funeral, we had a wake, and we were like going around where he grew up was like Brunswick Street. And every bar we went into, and no lies, Float On, Modest Mouse came on. Now that is just no coincidence. Sorry. Woo-woo, no woo-woo. That was not woo-woo. That was absolutely Tim Martin, 100%. And also, there was one moment I remember when I went into the toilets, and the lights started flicking on and off, and I was like, "Stop it! You're freaking me out." And also, he just leaves us feathers. He's very good at leaving us feathers. When we first checked into an Airbnb when we arrived for his funeral, all the windows were shut before we went to bed, and I swear to God they were, because I think there was like sort of like, what was it? Like some hay fever stuff. The pollen was high. That was it. So I remember shutting all the windows. But when I woke up, I went to get out of bed, and on the left-hand side, there was this massive native bird feather. And I was thinking, there's only one. It's totally Tim. Oh. So he sends us songs, he sends us feathers. And if I know he's around, I get goosebumps, and I get kind of quite cold, like really cold. And that's when I know when he's around. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful feeling. And we've spread some of his ashes here in Suva, just outside my house here at Suva Point. We've also spread some of his ashes on the Great Ocean Road in Fairhaven, where he used to holiday, and his parents got a beach house. And we've also got ashes at Natandollar where Intercon is. The irony being is that he wasn't a flashy guy, but I love the Intercon here in Fiji. And the irony being that when he passed, he would have been like, of course you spared my ashes here, Sarah. Any excuse to come and visit the Intercon. Such
a beautiful beach to have your ashes sprinkled on.
Yeah.
And I can imagine it's so comforting to have that feeling of him coming through, and, you know, knowing that he's okay and that he's watching over you and he's still here in some sense with you. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us and opening yourself up to this conversation. I can definitely see a book in you. I mean, obviously that's the obvious pathway where you're going to go here. And I can actually see more than one book coming out of you. I think there's so many situations where you could create amazing stories and sharing your wisdom and your experiences to help other people. And, you know, we haven't even touched on your motherhood story, which I will link to another episode of another podcast where you talk about that in depth. But it's quite an interesting journey, because I know you are very passionate about, you know, educating people about reproductive and sexual health as well. And you've had your own very interesting journey into motherhood and you know, even from a young age and what you've endured. So I will definitely link. That is a fascinating listen as well. And perhaps we can have you on again to talk about that. I think that would be amazing. So before we go, I can't leave without asking you your best non-fiction self-development books that you've read that you can suggest that we pick up as well.
I would suggest, but I'm thinking coming from a sort of grief kind of background, not grief background, but I'm Julia Samuels, Grief Works would be one. So for anyone that has lost a loved one, I would highly recommend that book, just because it's really, lost a loved one, always losing a loved one. It's a really good sort of true story about people who've like lost loved ones, and it gives you some very practical steps on how to sort of deal with that. There's also Lieb Gutter, and it's called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, and it's about this American psychologist lady, therapist, and she basically follows 5 of her clients over a year, and they're going through various degrees of issues during that at that time. So there's this movie TV exec guy who kind of waltzes in, and he's really like moody, doesn't say much, and he's actually quite rude, but she starts to scratch at the surface, and it turns out there's actually, and what he's actually there for is to basically talk about that loss. And yeah, I'm not going to like spoiler, but I feel like that's a really good, awesome self-help book, and I've been recommending that to lots of people actually, especially during COVID. And there's also like stories in there. There's a lady that's dying of cancer, and it's like basically about her last wishes. And also the therapist herself, she's basically decided to go for therapy because she's just been in this kind of like relentless sort of relationships which aren't really going anywhere. So those would be the 2 books that I would recommend.
Thank you so much. And you've also got a podcast that you've launched. So if any other book lovers out there who want to continuously hear your reviews on books and get your insight into them, what's that called?
It's called Self Absorbed, and it's on Spotify and on Apple.
Yeah, you're having a bit of fun with that?
Yeah, I love it. I just love it. You know, again, when I decided to really go full frontal with like my Instagram page, I remember thinking, I'd love to do a podcast. And literally that night, I went out to dinner, and I met this English guy who'd literally just launched a podcast. So that's how that story comes about. So again, when you feel like am I on the right path? Then the universe gives you a nudge like that. I think you know that you're on the right path.
Absolutely. I actually had a reading the other day, and that's all they could tell me. They said, you are exactly where you need to be right now. Thank you so very much for your time today, Sarah. I can't wait to meet you in person. So hit me up if you're in Nandi. I will definitely hit you up when I'm in Suva next. And you know what? Sending love to you from all of us who are listening today. We think you're amazing.
So much love. So much love. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. I'd love to keep the conversation going. Let us know what you thought of this episode, and if something profound came up for you that you want to share, let's talk about it. You can find me on Instagram at Things You Can't Unhear, or on my personal page at Maritza_Barone. And if someone you know will benefit from something that was said in this show, make sure you share it with them too. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and keep up to date with what's next. And if you can spare a few seconds, please rate and review the show on iTunes, just so other people can find us more easily and quickly. And as always, my friends, be happy, be healthy, be conscious, and be kind.